The climate devas are having compassion for us, keeping it at least somewhat cool. Thank you, climate devas. There's a lot of deva references in the suttas, and those we can just kind of, with our Western scientific mindset, we can just kind of set those references aside, but they are very interesting to make note of. And devas who delight in good weather. And there's a whole like devas connected with different types of weather in the Samyutta Nikaya. There's cloud devas, so devas who delight in clouds, devas who delight in wind. And it's quite interesting, actually, that the clouds and the wind and the different types of weather formations are an expression of that particular type of delight of that deva. So it's a very unusual group of suttas. So we can interpret those however we like, but they are there. We could interpret it metaphorically or literally. We could take it personally. We could interpret it personally. The weather isn't good, so the devas don't like me. Yeah. Maybe I don't have some good karma, some bad karma. So we can take it personally. But just coming back to, it is what it is, however it is. There's also Manusa devas. These are deva-like humans. So Manusa devas are human beings who are drawn to the practice, drawn to cultivating the path. Those are classed as Manusa devas. They want to do dana and sila samadhi panya. So we can think of devas in that way. Deva-like actions, deva-like mental states, deva-like intentions, wanting to help, wanting other people to be happy. So that's boon. That's what we call boon, or punya in Pali. Don't really have a English equivalent for that, for boon. No real English word. We say merit, but that's not a very good translation of punya. So you have to use a multi-word translation. Multi-word translation, something like fundamental goodness, or so say, I'm making boon, I'm making fundamental goodness. That would be a good translation for boon, perhaps, in English. In Thai, they don't translate it either. They just say boon, and they know what it means. But boon comes from the punya, so there's no actual Thai, unrelated to Pali word for that. It's just they just take it from the Pali. So we could say punya in English, but it doesn't mean much to us because we haven't used it for centuries. We don't have it built into our culture yet. Maybe will be eventually. So we'll wait for Longpor. He's on his way up, and then once Longpor takes his seat, the Dhamma Talk could be requested at that time.
Brahmachalokadipati Sahampati Katanjali Ana Divarang Ayachata Santita Sata Parajakajatika Dese tu dhammang anukampimang bhajang.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. Okay, so today is day 5 of 9 days of Dhamma, 25 years of Abhayagiri, honoring our elders. And of course, there's been various Dhamma reflections, Q&A on various themes of practice and life, and the meditations that we've been doing together. So it's been quite a, and I think it's quite a rich experience. And quite a lovely occasion. Great way to mark this kind of milestone of Abhayagiri. One of the things I thought I would talk about today is I think probably listening to Ajahn Amaro and then reflecting back on, of course, our collaboration and whatnot, but also, I think thinking about the kind of the ethos or the purpose of Abhayagiri, and because I remember when he and I were, so we hadn't yet moved here, and sitting down and talking about, there was a kind of a tentative agreement to maybe collaborate, but I think for both of us, we wanted to feel each other out, to figure out whether we had a similar vision or not, and obviously we did, because it happened. But reflecting on the what both he and I felt were important kind of principles and focuses to bring into the establishing of this new monastery in in Northern California, and to the recognition that there were all sorts of Buddhist groups, meditation centers, spiritual centers of all sorts, and what wasn't very apparent was say like a traditional monastery that people could, and particularly sort of Americans could come and train at, and be able to establish a place for monastic training, and also just we were quite clear from the beginning that we would need to, because things were going to be complicated enough, and to be able to try to just keep things fairly simple, so that providing a place where both men and women could come and practice, but really to try to support, say, nuns training somewhere else, and which we've tried to do as best we can, but to be able to focus on the sort of male monastic training in this place, and because it's something that is so new and different to the society. Like America is kind of, and still is, fundamentally a Protestant culture, and kind of Protestant Christian culture, and it's finally sort of kicking and screaming into the 21st century as something a bit more. But even that is I say, like 25 years ago, was still quite new. And most people didn't have much sense of monastic training, and if they were familiar with monastic training, they tended to think in terms of Catholicism, which is quite separate from the society. Quite separate, quite independent, quite autonomous, which is kind of fundamentally the direct opposite to what Theravada monastic practice is, and certainly Thai Theravada practice, where the monasteries are close to the villages. I mean, this is from just the way that the Buddha established the training. There is a direct relationship of dependence on the lay community, and that has kept the monasteries and the society around it kind of in communication and in relationship to each other, so that so wanting to bring that example of of our tradition, because certainly I think that was one of the most inspiring things for me, going to my very first visit to Ajahn Chah's monastery, Wat Pah Pong, as a newly ordained monk. I mean, there was many impressions, but of course the first one was just how peaceful it was, and that sense of, oh, this is what I've been looking for all my life, you know, and something peaceful, an environment that is really holds those who enter into it in a very peaceful, solid kind of, but kind of, you know, there's a kind of warmth and openness there as well, and then, of course, the example of Ajahn Chah and the community at Wat Pah Pong, I mean, just as already of a reasonable size when I first went in the early 70s, and there's this sense of focus and commitment, focus, commitment, integrity, that the monks and nuns at Wat Pah Pong really exemplified. So that was very inspiring to me. But also, and maybe even more so, was the involvement of the lay community. Just how every single day there were lay people coming to the monastery. Then once a week, the lay people would come on the lunar observance days, and they would chant and meditate and listen to Dhamma, and then they do that. They come in the morning, they stay through the day, and then they'd stay through the night and sit and meditate through the night. And I mean, I had a hard time sitting still for half an hour. And here were these lay people coming from their homes and sitting through the whole night. It was just astounding to me and inspiring. And I happened to be there. I was a short visit, about a month, because I had ordained, not really knowing what the heck I was doing, and I think my good karma took me to Wat Pah Pong, but Ajahn Chah was also, I would say, the very first thing that he said to me when I arrived, paid respects to him. Saying, well, if you want to stay here, you have to stay at least 5 years. And that was just way too much for me. I was really young, and 5 years is that's almost the rest of your life when you're in your early 20s, So I just couldn't. That was just too much for me. But I stayed for a month, and very inspired. But the idea of commitment was it's not. Well, that was a bit much. And but then also during the time that I was there, it happened to be Magha Puja, which is. In those days, those were the days when the various branch monasteries of Ajahn Chah would come together. And then all the lay people from those branch monasteries would come, and it would be a day it would be a full moon, and there'd be a circumambulation at night, and there'd be Dhamma talks through the night. So that was, it was a large hall. Wat Bapong, Ajahn Chah's monastery, had a large Dhamma hall, but it was completely full. It was probably, I think maybe altogether, maybe a couple hundred monks, and then who knows how many lay people, but it was overflowed the hall and out into the area around, and this circumambulation in moonlight and candlelit procession. I mean, it's quite magical. So, but just that relationship, or the opportunity for relationship of the, of the lay community, providing a place where, say, anybody who is interested in Dhamma can come and practice, come and study the Buddha's teachings, come and participate in the life. But it was within the container of a solid monastic routine. So that was the sort of thing that both Ajahn Amaro and I wanted to bring to America again, is that sense of, okay, there's meditation centers, and there's meditation groups, and there's various places of spiritual practice, but that particular flavor, both of us wanted to try to bring that here with the kind of the monastic form, because that's a very traditional form. How to bring that traditional form of Buddha Dhamma Sangha as refuge, and commitment to Sila, Samadhi, Panya. I mean, it sounds trite and not that consequential, but it really is a powerful container for inner transformation, and being able to live a life of spiritual practice, whether as a monastic or as a layperson, in as focused and pure a way as possible, without getting too kind of tangled up and idealistic about being absolutely pure, which is something that is, I mean, that's easily kind of drifts into that as well, trying to be kind of prissy pure about how one lives a life, and it's sort of like, no, that's and that's exactly in terms of the examples that we saw of our teachers, of Ajahn Chah and his senior disciples. These are real human beings living real human lives, and human lives can be a bit messy, but still having the training and the refuges to create that anchor. So to give that opportunity to people within, say, this society, to come and experience and see. And we were definitely kind of not committed to spreading the Dhamma. The intention was to come and practice the Dhamma, and figuring that, and Ajahn Chah, used to see it. You don't have to worry about kind of like spreading the Dhamma, being missionary monks in the West. He said it's like if you're a good cook and you make good soup, people will come. It's that's the reality, and so that I felt that we wanted to focus as best we could on the monastic form being upheld in the training that we received, being kind of adhered to, particularly in its spirit, if not completely in the letter, because there's certain elements that are just because of climate and is different, but figuring out ways to make it work. Easy example. It didn't take very long being here to realize that summer in California is not the rainy season, which is that's the time in Thailand when it's the time for the Vasa or the Pansa, and that's the time for 3 months and in the Vinaya of 3 months of not traveling and focusing on the community and to realize that yes, it is the rainy season in Thailand. Yes, it is the time when they all spend the Vasa together, but there's no rain, and it's dry and it's hot, but the winter, okay, it's raining. Its travel is not so wonderful. It's much more a time of hunkering down, and also like in terms of the dry season, if you're going to build anything, you have to build it during that season, so that I realize, okay, there's always going to be work projects going on in the summertime, and we can take a break. So we ended up making a bit of a hybrid, so that we certainly keep the Pansa or the Vasa period according to Vinaya, not traveling, fulfilling those rules, but we would need to be doing just the basics of looking after the monastery and work projects that need to get accomplished, doing buildings, has to be done in the summertime. So what we would do is then take that summer period, and we would have a period of group retreat, short period, but then give the opportunity individually to monks to have a period of retreat for at least a couple weeks, and then everybody got a turn. So we had a bit of stepping back, but then when it come to the winter, January, February, March, start the new year. It's January, February, March, winter time, rainy season, cold and cloudy. Everything stops, and we go into kind of the whole community on retreat. And so to me, it's turned out kind of, we get a bonus. We get the 3 months of the winter retreat, and then we do have the summertime. It's a time to sort of, okay, slow down a bit. Okay, take a break, step back, and then that's also a time when we do the Vinaya instruction during the summertime for all the monastic rules of training, going over them very thoroughly, so that the community, from the monks, novices, anagarikas, all have a good foundation in all the rules of discipline. And then the winter time is completely focused on the meditation practice. Whereas, say, like in Thailand, it would tend to be both the pansa, or the vasa period, would be a time both for, say, being retreat, meditation, but also Vinaya instruction would tend to take place at the same time. So we're able to split it up, and I think it works really well. I think it's really, really beneficial. So being able to develop the monastic form in a form that is suitable for the West, for the country here, and we do live quite a ways away from. I mean, it's 16 miles into town. So to consider going alms round every single day like we would in Thailand, quite difficult. But once a week, it's been from the early days of Abhayagiri. Once we got our change of use permit, and we're sort of legally able to establish a monastery, then we started going alms round in the area in Ukiah, in Redwood Valley, along Tomkai Road, and have kept that up, except for this hiatus during the pandemic, and having to set it aside. And that, and we heard, like during the pandemic, we heard from many of the townspeople in Ukiah saying, "Oh, we miss seeing the monks." Yeah, so it's quite. You see, and sometimes you don't realize, because it's ordinary. It's part of our life, and you never quite know the impact that you make on ordinary people. But that has been the case. There's a sense of connection with the local people, and then people come from all over to study and practice for shorter or longer periods of time. We've got the facilities to be able to accept people, and we try to keep it so that it's not too many people all at once, so that there's a good experience for everybody. But then also in terms of the actual training for the monastics, and we put quite a lot of emphasis on, and of course the emphasis on formal practice, on meditation, but also on learning how to live in community, because it's certainly Ajahn Chah had, he put a very strong emphasis on the importance of Sangha, on the importance of community. Because as human beings, the things that most irritate, upset, intimidate us is other people. And just learning how to live together. That's not, it's a nice ideal. Oh, live harmoniously, have loving kindness and compassion for everybody. And you could do that alone at your kuti for extended periods of time. But then when you have to actually work with somebody who's just completely irritating, that all falls apart real quick. So that's part of practice, part of training, part of learning how to adapt and adjust to different people, different temperaments, but then also learning how to communicate in a way that is skillful, and that's been a part of the developing of the community here is putting the emphasis on, say, both those elements of, say, the formal practice, the study, learning the teachings, getting a good foundation in the teachings, getting a good foundation in the practice, but then also integrating it with our daily life, integrating it with our interactions with each other, integrated with taking responsibility for the community. That's. I remember Ajahn Chah telling the story of one monk who came. He ordained from somewhere else. He's quite young. Came to. He'd heard about Ajahn Chah. Came to Wat Pah Pong to visit and pay respects, and was sort of gushing to Ajahn Chah. Oh, this is so wonderful. This place is so. It's just so. Peaceful and neat and tidy, and everything's so clean and well looked after. Isn't that wonderful? How does that happen? And Ajahn Chah, it just happens by itself. It's just magical. I said, no, you have to do it. On a daily basis, you have to look after things. On a daily basis, you have to live with each other. On a daily basis, you have to take responsibility and be engaged to a certain degree, and certainly, oftentimes, like people come here and say, of course, there's all the buildings need to be looked after, and that was also one of the things we realized pretty quickly, that we did not have the skills to build anything. We shouldn't be given the responsibility to build anything, but we can at least look after them, and because also it actually has to pass building codes, and it is a lot of work to do that, so that we've committed to hiring contractors to do that work. But it all has to be maintained and has to be looked after. And then all of the trails, people say, "Oh, isn't it wonderful how there's just all these trails through the forest?" I say, well, every single trail, every single step through the forest, we had to carry out the wood that makes those steps. We had to carry all the tools to clear that. We had to do all of that. They didn't magically appear, and they weren't. It wasn't part of being here. So a lot of work has gone into creating it and maintaining it, and that's that also forms a part of the training. It's not sort of, well, when I get the work done, then I'll meditate, or then I'll practice. That's oftentimes the perception. It's like they're two different things. But in, say, certainly and Ajahn Yannika was talking about it yesterday. That sense of say at Wat Pah Pong, Ajahn Chah's monastery, and other monasteries, there would be work, and sometimes they really throw themselves into the work, but also it's always being held, or needs to be held, in terms of practicing, and so that how do I be mindful? How do I be careful and attentive? How do I be frugal with the things the materials and the tools that we're using? All of that is part of a consideration, part of the training, part of practice, and it isn't. And the work, literally, I mean, for all of us as human beings, the work never ends. There's always something to do. And it is recognized. It's not when I get the work finally finished. When the monastery, like oftentimes people ask, "Oh, is the monastery finished yet? Is the monastery built yet?" As if, oh, when it's built, I'll come. Well, it's never finished. There is no such thing as a finished monastery. Ajahn Sumedho and Ajahn Amaro and another monk, one time they went to Egypt and going to various places, and one of the monks who went along was actually, he's incredibly knowledgeable of Egyptian history and hieroglyphics and language, and so he was but one of the places they went to was, I think it's St. Catherine's Monastery. It's in the Sinai, and it's the oldest Christian monastery in existence. So it's almost 2,000 years old, and it's been continuously occupied, inhabited. I mean, sometimes, according to history, sometimes it's gone up, sometimes it's gone down. There's been, they've had their share of difficulties. Historically, but it's a monastery, a Christian monastery that has been a place of monastic practice for almost 2 millennia. And so anyway, they went to visit, and they'd sent word ahead of time to the monastery that there were these senior Buddhist monks who were going to be coming to visit. The lay people who were invited the monks. They sent word, and so a monk came out to receive them, and then started to take the group around to show them different places, and then they got to a particular area of the monastery, and he started apologizing and saying, "Well, I'm really sorry. This area of the monastery it's under construction and it's not finished yet." And of course, all of our monks just started, and it was apologizing. They just burst out laughing and sort of said, "We know monasteries are never finished." So yeah, 2,000 years and it's not done yet. So, so we'll see how long Abhayagiri will be around. But and that's and it depends on the people. If those seeds of say of communal harmony, of respect, and to the triple gem, commitment to the practice and training, yeah, Abhayagiri will be here for a long time. And if those, because it's those same kind of seeds that allow the monastery to function quite smoothly in the present moment, and say 25 years, for it to put down roots, and those are the seeds that have allowed it to exist this far, and into the future. Those are the say the virtues and qualities that will need to be upheld by the monastics and the lay community. And again, the sense of the the communities relying on each other. That's always been the case in the traditional form of Theravada practice, and the that sense of the people coming to the monastery, even say like even during this period of time. I mean, it's quite ordinary, but it's just even these 9 days of Dhamma. Yeah, there's days when we had children coming and plugging in. Little Leo was here, and then Natalia was here, and it's great for them to be able to be exposed to a monastery from the time they're really little and feel, oh, this is a home. I was like, I say, Leo was here a couple of weeks ago, I think, for his birthday. His parents brought him, and he was sort of, oh, Ajahn Pasano wasn't here, and so he was really happy to come again during the practice period to be able to see me. So, because he's been coming since he was like for the first sort of baby blessing and cutting of his hair. So it's a say Alex is here today. He's had his kids up here for baby blessings. You left them at home today, so you'd have a quiet day. But still, it's that sense of the monastery is not just kind of the monastics, or it's not just a select few lay people. It's here for anybody who sees the value in it and wants to develop those qualities within their own life of refuge, of integrity, of mindfulness and peacefulness, of clarity, investigation. Those are all qualities, I think, that we all value, and having a physical place to be able to do that is really helpful. It's really important. That's what a monastery is for. And then for those who want to dig in and pursue monastic training, that is to be able to provide a place, and of course that's Ajahn Amaro and I from the early years. That was the hope that people would, Americans, because neither Ajahn Amma or I are American, and both of us have a certain healthy skepticism. Okay, what's America going to be like? We'll see. But that sense of interest and indeed enthusiasm has been there from the get-go, and so that's always been inspiring and wanting to facilitate people's interest and both to pursue practice but to pursue monastic training as well, and that's something that say has been 25 years. I mean, we've done a pretty good job of training people in the form, and the commitment to continue that and uphold those standards of training that's very firm in the community, and I think it's as a value that the whole community, extended community, are interested in maintaining and supporting is very, very strong. So it's something that is quite inspiring. And so that certainly for myself, having now that I'm a retired abbot, there's a lot of, I get a lot of joy from just walking around sometimes and just seeing the place or seeing the people, or like looking at the slideshow of, and there's so many things I've already forgotten. And realize, wow, there's so many things have happened in these 25 years, and all the different people who've been involved that are Abhayagiri. I mean, Abhayagiri is like Ajahn Yaniko said yesterday. Abhayagiri is not. It's not the buildings. It's the people, and so that and certainly it's the same with any religion. Religion is not the kind of the ceremonies and the rituals and the doctrines. It's the people, and so that certainly for the Buddhist religion is it's the people. It's us. It's not out there. It's sort of what kind of religious practice are we committed to? What kind of religious practice are we inspired by and want to say embody? Because that's the sense of practicing and training. Is not just trying to conform to some kind of ideas or ideals, but embodying it, living it. And because one can have all sorts of intelligent, well thought through ideas about Buddhist practice and philosophy and meditation, but you still might be completely scattered and messed up. It has to be embodied. I remember Ajahn Chah one time making the comment, because say for us as Westerners going to live in tropical climate, a forest with where you'd walk along. You go walk through the forest, and there'd be roots, and there'd be there'd be rocks here and there, and be roots, and people were always stubbing their toes or banging their feet up. There are always cuts, and of course in a tropical climate, if you don't pay attention to it, if you're not looking after it really quickly, it starts to get infected really quickly, and so they're always having to go to Ajahn Chah to get medicines for these various things. And remember somebody was talking to Ajahn Chah and talking about all the Westerners that were living with him and how they were educated and had given up their comfortable lives in the West to come and live in northeast of Thailand in this forest, and Ajahn Chah said, those Westerners, they're really clever and intelligent. Their feet are sure stupid, though. That is great for ideas, but actually just the practicality of living in your body was something a bit missing. So that, again, in our monastic training and our living of the practice, it's a commitment of our whole being, and whether it's for monastics or for the lay community, learning how to give oneself completely to the training, recognizing that it's training of body, speech, and mind. It's a whole training, because that's what creates. It's our actions by body, speech, and mind that create our happiness and well-being or our suffering. So that learning how to, and it's fairly simple and straightforward, but really committing to that. I really need to train body, speech, and mind. Really, how do I embody that so that it's not just a nice idea or something that I do from time to time, but this is how I live it. And so that living the teachings, living the practice, and certainly as a monastery, then hopefully the community is setting that example and learning how to do it, and then setting that example so the lay community can take that back to their lives and enrich their lives and enrich the lives of the people around them. So that's say from from a Buddhist perspective, the Buddha wasn't committed to kind of spreading the teachings everywhere, but he was committed to giving the opportunity for people to practice and to train and to taste the flavor of happiness and well-being, knowing that that's really what we all want. It's what we all crave, really. And if there's people who set that example, there's going to be other people who will pick that up and train. So that 25 years of Abhayagiri, sort of, it's a beginning, and hopefully it will continue to create benefit for many, many people. So I'll offer that for reflection.
$2:00 on the dot. remember Ajahn Jayasaro saying one time that when they had tape cassettes, I don't know how many people know what those are or remember what those are, but when they had tape cassettes at Wapananachat, and he made a adhitthana determination to talk exactly 60 minutes, to not waste any of the tape. And he would talk exactly 60 minutes every talk. And then after about a year and a half, he found out they were all 90-minute tapes. There was 30 minutes of blank on every single one. So he hadn't fulfilled his adhitthana to not waste any tape. So it's still not too hot, so we can do walking meditation for the next 45 minutes. We come back at 2:45. We have the forest walk for anybody interested, and also for anybody on the Zoom community, if you have a local park or somewhere outside of your home that you're able to do walking meditation out in nature, if that's possible, or maybe that's not possible, so you have to find a place in your home to do walking meditation and try to make that work as well. So we'll come back at 2:45. Take a short bathroom break if needed and meet at the bell tower, roughly 5 or 7 minutes. Take a 15-minute break and come back to 3:45 for the Q&A. Might be good to close both those, yeah. There's a particular type of fly at Abhayagiri called surgeon fly. And so we see the deer, we think the deer are cute, but we get closer, they're covered in these surgeon flies. They must be incredibly uncomfortable. And it's called deer dukkha. Their skin is always kind of quivering because these flies are biting them. And the surgeon fly is never satisfied. It has like a blade for a mouth, and it doesn't just drink your blood. It sticks the blade in and just walks backward, and it just cuts you, and it never really seems to drink the blood. So that's like tanha. It never gets satisfied. It causes pain, but it never actually gets fulfilled by anything. There's a lot of questions. Yeah, they're all really difficult questions. But it can all be distilled into, how do I stop suffering? Just each quite follow the Noble Eightfold Path, follow the Noble Eightfold Path, follow the... Cool. So there was 3 questions from yesterday that were not answered yet, that Ajahn Krudagammal circled on his sheet. How do you or other monks deal with grief associated with the passing away of loved ones, especially parents or caretaker who have been kind to you? Do you also experience crying out in isolation to heal that grief? Whether like crying out in isolation, I guess that's really up to the individual as to whether that would occur or not. It's a hard one to answer. Everybody relates to this differently. So it's not that we don't experience grief. Expressing the grief more doesn't necessarily heal it, but it's more just it's more like a very sober reflection on impermanence, and then we can bring that into, we can change our perspective a little bit too, in order to quote-unquote deal with it, in terms of rather than, so it's a slight shift in focus. So it's easy to focus on mourning the loss, but we can also focus on celebrating who they were or honoring who they were by doing merit or acts of generosity in their name, or dedicating, doing some sort of good deed and dedicating it for them. So actually doing something is helpful. Actually, like doing something good and dedicating it to that person can be quite a good way to express gratitude. So thinking of it as an expression of gratitude rather than dealing with grief. So a way to celebrate their life and express gratitude, and also to reflect on, that's also going to happen to me. I'm going to die eventually. Everybody, without exception, is going to pass away. We don't have that long here. So to really look at what was good about someone's life and do something in their memory it can be quite helpful. Are monks in the forest tradition also required to meditate near dead bodies in cremation grounds? Is that to uproot defilements of fear of death? Is it considered psychologically safe, as it can be overwhelming stress on the mind? Well, you do need to have some experience with the practice before going into a cremation ground, and you can overcome fear of death, fear of ghosts. One of the Dhutanga practices, allowable ascetic practices for bhikkhus, is to live in a cremation ground, to determine to live in a cremation ground for a period of time. But the main impetus, or the main reason for living in a cremation ground, is the reflection, I too will be like that. I too am of that nature. That will be my body eventually. And it's a reflection on, again, it's the same type of reflection on impermanence. So it's not to have like a macabre fascination with dead bodies or seeing them burn and kind of, in order to, we don't want to, if it's psychologically overwhelming, we shouldn't be doing that practice. But Wat Pah Nanachat is good for this, because Wat Pah Nanachat's a charnel ground, so they burn the bodies at Wat Pah Nanachat, and we can spend the night around the cremation pyre and watch the body burn and just reflect on the ordinariness of it. It's incredibly ordinary, actually. It's not like some sort of horror movie, or death is the most, as Longpo Liam said once, death is the most ordinary thing in the world. So it's getting our mind around that and coming to an acceptance that death is something very natural and normal. And that's how we train ourselves to accept that. Can you expand on what is the core Wat for how to treat teachers and how to treat guests? That would take quite a while. But if you like to see Buddhist Monastic Code 2 by Tanisaro Bhikkhu, Ajahn Jeff, then there's the protocols around the Acharya Watas and Akanduka Watas. There's the different Acharya Watas, things like in the time of the Buddha, putting out water, putting out preparing a foot washing area, putting out tooth cleaning sticks, putting out kanji if they take kanji in the morning, just basic looking after them, washing their robes. How to treat guests. It depends on the guest. So if it's a lay guest or a monastic guest, you would treat them differently. So say a monastic guest, if they were junior to you, you would just make sure they have a dwelling place. If they're going to come and stay, you make sure they have a dwelling place, make sure that place is clean, lead them there, make sure they know where the dining hall is, where the Dhamma hall is, where the bathrooms are. And then the duty of that guest is also, if they don't get told those things, their duty is to ask, where are those things? And pretty basic, pretty practical. But if you want to know more, you can check out Buddhist Monastic Code 2. And I'll go into some of these written questions. Could you please elaborate on rules for putting one's hands in Anjali when speaking to a monk at Abhayagiri? Should the hands be held throughout a conversation, or does it depend on what is being spoken about? Is there something other than respect that one should be holding in one's heart? Abject fear? And what about bowing? It's a weakness in my practice that I would like to improve. It's just, putting the hands in Anjali, even if you don't put your hands in Anjali at all, it's more like seeing how the spirit moves, seeing how the heart moves. It's not like, you could, like when you talk to a senior monk or something, or any monk, you could just, when you start talking, you can put your hands in Anjali and then put them down, or if you're really feeling it, you could keep your hands up, the whole time. And it's really, but it's not like, I'm going to stop talking to them because they should have their hands in Anjali when I'm talking to them. And it's really just based on the feeling. There's no rule around it. It's an etiquette in Thailand, in Thai Buddhism. This is something that comes up. So like bowing is also based on, we have for the monastics, we bow when we come in the hall or when we leave the hall. And it's more like an establishment of mindfulness when we bow. It's not like, you should have a certain level of respect for Buddha Dhamma Sangha, so everyone's just going to be at where they're at. We can't force ourselves to have faith or force ourselves to throw ourselves on the ground out of absolute faith in the Buddha or in the monks. So, but it's more just, when we bow, we come to meditate, and we bow, and it's a cultivation of mindfulness, and we're setting an intention to do a certain activity, in this case, meditation. When we, say, get up in the morning, first thing we do, get up, bow to our shrine in the kuti, and then go about our morning, and before we come down, bow before we leave. So it's making every activity very deliberate, and it's like a reestablishing of mindfulness before each activity. When somebody shows you how to do something correctly, but the manner in which they convey the message is rude, what is the most skillful thing you can do to let the person know they were perceived as rude, but also fully and completely absorb the content of their beneficial message? The main question here is oftentimes people do have good suggestions, but the way they communicate them are sometimes not appreciated. And so you may have an inclination to throw the good and bad away. How do you avoid falling into this trap? Yeah, that's also one of the simple pleasures of living in community life. This just happens all the time, this kind of thing. And sometimes maybe people don't even intend to be rude. They don't even intend to be rude, but it's just people, may not have highly honed social skills or highly developed ways of speaking to each other, so that they may actually have an intention to help and not be upset or angry, but still come across that way, or based on our own karma, our own upbringing, and we don't know the people we're living with. Sometimes we're all coming from different areas of the country sometimes and different backgrounds, and so somebody may be totally well-intentioned, but we take it as, we're taken aback, or we think, we take it as like they're being very harsh. And so it's good to actually give people the benefit of the doubt. And, they may actually have had been too strong, or they may actually have something they can work on, but we kind of have to find the right time if we feel comfortable. Or we can also, if something is really serious, we can find a third party to mediate a conversation, a difficult conversation with somebody. And also it's good to reflect, has there ever been times when we spoke like that to somebody? So one way to develop equanimity is to contemplate karma, like, have I ever done that action? Have I ever been that way to somebody else? To my friends or family or kids or whatever, have I ever spoken that way to somebody in terms of pointing something out? So that's a good, can be a good reflection as well. So it's always two-sided. There's always two sides to every story. It's never just, I'm completely right and they're completely wrong. There's always a mixture. Also, just nonviolent communication is a good thing to study. I always like to recommend that as like right speech, factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. This is, say, to let that person know they were perceived as rude, that wouldn't be nonviolent communication. Say, like, going up to someone and saying, what you said to me, I perceived that as rude, so that's like an evaluation or a judgment of another person. But rather, when you pointed this out to me, when you said this to me, I felt ... I felt hurt, I felt afraid, I felt sad, or some sort of, so it's like taking responsibility for how we're feeling, not I felt attacked, because I felt attacked means you're attacking me and I know your intention and I can read your mind. So I felt attacked is not a feeling, but like I felt sad, I felt afraid, I felt like I wanted to hide or whatever. And they'll, and they may be like, I'm so sorry, I didn't intend that, or they may be like, or maybe they'll, who knows how they'll react, but that can be a good opener. So there's a lot of questions, so I think that's good enough for that one for now. Can you tell us about the history of female monastics or aspirants that stayed at the monastery in the early days and why it didn't work out? A little bit. I don't want to go into the whole thing, but I was in Anagarika, and we had Sister Ajahns Sundara and Sister Jitendriya living here, and also Aya Tanasati, Sister Tanasanti for a while. They were Siladharas, and it's just it comes up in communities. It's just difficult to have male and female monastics together, and I won't go into the details here because this is a public teaching, but just that it's just coming back to the way the Buddha originally set it up, with separate communities that meet up sometimes, is just so much more efficacious, it seems. But it also wasn't bad. I did have a lot of appreciation for them when I was in Anagarika. How do you understand the phrase, the body within the body? Gosh, there's a lot of ways you could understand that one. There's the body in and of itself. That's one way of thinking of it. Just the body mindfulness, embodied awareness, mindfulness of the body. You can think of it as the sensations in the body, or just keeping the focus just in the body, not too dispersed. Or bodies within bodies. So, you could focus on one aspect or one part. If there's pain coming up in the body, or there's tension or anxiety somewhere, that's one. That's kind of how I work with it. But it's, there's just probably 1,000 different ways you could interpret that. But there's for all these things in Buddhism, it's not like there's a right answer where you can say, like, multiple choice exam, this is the right one and you got it right, and now you have panya, now you have wisdom. It's dynamic. What the Buddha is pointing to, a dynamic panya, or wisdom, is a discernment, is a dynamic quality which allows us to live in a flow of dropping things and letting go, and not picking things up. So it's not like you just like get the answer right and then everything falls away. But it's training, it's learning to live in a way where we don't pick things up that are suffering, that are problematic. Gosh, difficult questions. What duty do we have to parents who often act foolishly and use harmful and abusive language? Jeez. When questions like this get asked, I'm kind of hoping that those parents aren't sitting in the room. So, but I can't think of anyone here who acts this way right now. So, unless, but you never know. When people leave the monastery, maybe they're like different people. They're on their best behavior in the monastery. I remember, actually I won't tell that story. I guess the duty would be reflect on it, reflect on the relationship. Also, just like earlier, like, have we ever acted in that way? Can we say, I've never been that way, that they are to me? You know, I've never ever been that way. So to reflect on it and see, like, always bringing it back to ourselves, because we have, that's what we can train, that's what we can work with. We can't, it's nearly impossible to go around changing other people or outside situations, but we can change ourselves and thereby set a good example and thereby have like that ripple out effect and be a good example for people, have a good influence on people. That we can do. So we can train ourselves, we can work on ourselves, so that's our duty. That's also our duty. We can not act foolishly and use harmful and abusive language. You know, we have the power to change that. I think like my dad's stepdad, my grandpa's stepdad was from a Mormon from Salt Lake City who had the view that you have to beat the devil out of your children. And my grandpa had very dark skin because of his own ancestry, and so that he was beaten more than the other kids. They were all beaten because they all had the devil in them, but he was beaten perhaps more. But he made a conscious decision to not treat his own children that way, and he was always unbelievably kind to his children. And so that was to like my own dad and his brother and sister. So you know, you think you don't have to keep that going or keep perpetuating that. Can you please describe the main stages of insight meditation? Thank you. Again, without getting into hours and hours, whole treatise. I mean, these kind of things can be found in the suttas, but also it's different traditions describe it in different ways. So we might have like the Vipassana, the Goenka tradition might describe it in one way. Tibetan tradition might describe it in one way. Visuddhimagga. Or really, it really comes back to experience. So even though this isn't a question about dependent origination, or paticca samuppada, I think it is similar to something Luang Por said, that you know, it's like just look at dukkha, just look at suffering, just look at dukkha. Keep it simple. It's like when you're falling out of a tree and you're trying to count the branches as you go down, and you can't count. It's just happening too fast. You can't count the branches as you're falling, but when you hit the bottom, you know it hurts. That's what you can know. So, and you look at that. How can I not fall out of that tree again? How can I avoid that suffering in the future? So in terms of the main stages of insight meditation, it's really, we can describe it perhaps in a certain way according to there's these seven stages of insight or whatever. We could explain it in an academic way and list what's in the book or what's translated from Pali or Sanskrit in the books. But coming back to our own experience, how is our practice of not picking things up? How's our practice of forgiving? How's our practice of the precepts? What do we do? How do we react when in the meditation, when a difficult mental state or anger or greed or some sort of proliferation that won't calm down? How do we deal with that? So that's insight, is when we see the suffering of that. That's why the Buddha's just really trying to drive the point home all the time of this is suffering, this is the ending of suffering. That's all I teach. All I teach is suffering and the ending of suffering. All I teach is dukkha and the ending of dukkha. So it's when the heart, on a very deep level, really sees this is dukkha, then it can't pick it up because it's like fire. It can't. When you see a fire, you're not going to be able to will yourself to put your hand in the fire, or you might, but you're going to retract it immediately. And when you put your hand in a fire, and your hand is in a fire and it's burning you, you don't need to consult a manual and say, like, what are the stages of getting my hand out of this fire? Like, maybe I need to check and see how to do it. You don't need to do that. Your hand is automatically out of the fire. So the heart is the same, the chitta is the same with insight, and with the seeing of dukkha, it can't be in a fire. It can't be in the fire anymore. It'll retract itself because it sees the suffering of it. But because there's still ignorance and delusion, then it doesn't see how it's tormenting itself. So it's still burning away in there. So in terms of insight, I think that's how I try to think about it in terms of experientially, and trying to see the dukkha aspect of these different proliferations and these different mental states that are arising. And again, it's not about stopping the mental state or stopping the proliferation. It's about seeing the dukkha in it. So that's a really vital point, because if we try to just stop it or stamp it out, then we're not seeing the dukkha of it. And actually trying to stop it and stamp it out in itself is also dukkha. So we have to step back and see, where's the dukkha? Where's the dukkha in this, and the desire? How's the tanha operating here? What is the illumination that appears during sitting meditation, please? Is it the false or the true? Is it from inside or outside, or neither, please? Thank you. I don't know. I think this one might have been answered in the previous question. It's kind of a little bit. It's just coming back to that dukkha aspect rather than waiting for something to happen. So sitting meditation, just waiting for some sort of illumination or bright light, or get struck by a giant purple lightning bolt, or whatever idea we have that's supposed to happen to us. This reminds me of somebody who stayed here a long time ago, and they were practicing a lot, and then they were asking what they should contemplate, and I mentioned like they could try contemplating impermanence, and then a few days later, at a Q&A tea time, they said, well, I contemplated impermanence and nothing happened. Well, I said, well, what did you want to happen? So I don't know, I just thought something was supposed to happen, like I contemplate impermanence and something happens. So, well, if it was that easy, then there would be a lot more meditators in the world, and a lot more people practicing. So, yes, perhaps we can think of illumination in terms of seeing dukkha can lead to illumination. Seeing craving, seeing tanha, seeing the whole process can lead to illumination. But then when we ask questions like, is it false or the true? Things like that, it's just tying ourselves up in knots. It's like we're good at kind of confounding ourselves. So just keeping it very simple, like the awareness of the breath, breathing in, breathing out, just looking at, trying to give rise. Motivation is very important, like giving rise to what we want is a sense of ease, and what that comes from is seeing clearly, seeing with mindfulness, seeing dukkha. And if it arises, it doesn't really matter whether it's from inside or outside or neither. So this is a shift in focus. So rather than trying to answer what is it, we want to, the scientific mind wants to know what is it. But even if what is it gets answered, that doesn't keep the dukkha from arising. So there's a bit of a misunderstanding in the heart, and we all have this, that if we might think, just if I got the answer, what is it? Then I'll be okay. Then it'll be better. Then I'll know what it is. But there'll still be that mental factor of seeking there, and that's dukkha. So trying to shift the focus into looking at that is quite important. There's a very long question here now about Burma, Myanmar, and I'm not going to answer it just because it's kind of a never-ending conversation, or how to save the world from people who are crazy and ignorant. So again, just coming back to that idea, we can't. One is we have to realize that when we see things on the news or people tell us things, it's always not a sure thing that that's what's exactly happening. We really have to go there or know for ourselves. And two, we can only really take responsibility for ourselves. So, if the Buddha really set that example, he spoke out in the suttas against war, and there was going to be a big battle between his homeland and a neighboring state over water rights, and the Buddha recommended they don't fight, they don't go to war. But when they did, he didn't intervene. He didn't try to stop them. You would think that, well, he's the Buddha, he could take his psychic powers and go fly out over the battlefield and make everybody stop fighting. But that wasn't what happened. And so really our duty is to set the example. And the world belongs to Mara. The world is the realm of death. And it's always just going to be, there's always going to be pain. It's always going to be unsatisfactory in this way. It's not condoning bad things that happen in the world, but it's doing what we can in ourselves, the sila, samadhi, panya, the practice, doing what we can to set an example, doing what we can to get the message of peace and understanding out there. But that's all we can do. At a certain point, we have to say we have to rest content saying, I did everything I could. And that's good. That's good to do everything we can. That's so much better than just bemoaning a situation or complaining endlessly about it to everybody who is around us. Also, as a side note, that's like why people request. We don't go and talk Dhamma to anybody. We actually only speak when it's requested. So it's the same with anything, not just with Dhamma. So with the world or politics or anything, it's nice to not speak to somebody about it unless they ask you about it. Then it'll be more efficacious as well. So if somebody really wants to know what you have to say about it, they'll ask. But please, it's very good to make a practice of not proselytizing in that sense either. So very, very kind of important to apply the Dhamma to situations like this. Okay, I'm answering questions longer than I normally do. If we don't have a Sangha close to where we live, should we move to a different place, or are online Sanghas good enough? And can non-Buddhist people be part of your Sangha, or does that not count as Sangha? No, they have to be Buddhist, and they have to keep their hands in Anjali all the time. For example, my mom is very supportive, but is not a Buddhist. Could she be part of my Sangha anyways? Yeah, I mean, anybody. Sangha just means community, so community of practitioners, community of friends who are supporting each other. What does it mean to be a Buddhist anyway? The for us to be a card-carrying Buddhist is 3 refuges and 5 precepts. So those 5 precepts, not one of those precepts is, you have to have absolute belief in the Buddha. It's just, don't kill, don't steal, don't commit sexual misconduct, don't lie, don't take intoxicants. So it's that upright living, kindness, basic kindness, upright living, integrity. So, and somebody who, when the Dalai Lama was asked, like, how do we convert people to Buddhism? Somebody asked the Dalai Lama, how do I convert people to Buddhism? And he said, you don't convert people to Buddhism. If we're doing any converting, it's converting from suffering to happiness. It's converting from unskillfulness to skillfulness. That's all we care about. That's all we're trying to do. Next question. It seems that monks have a pretty strict schedule. What is the purpose of this? I used to set myself really strict schedules so I wouldn't have to think about what to do next. I no longer have a strict schedule, and it's tough to adjust. Wondering what to do next can be overwhelming and stressful, but a super strict schedule made me feel like I was a robot sometimes. So I wonder what you'd suggest in terms of scheduling one's daily life, and if you could talk about why monks have such a strict daily routine. Thank you so much. Well, I mean, every monastery is different, and we meditate at 5 a.m. and we do our chanting and meditation. Just having a basic structure, but it gets switched up sometimes. Sometimes we have periods of self-retreat where it's totally unstructured. Come down for the meal, bring our food back up to our hut, and eat in solitude and just have no structure at all. So there are times when it's structured, there's times when it's not structured, and it's all for just seeing the mind. So we don't want to overly structure ourselves. We don't want to be overly reliant on, making sure everything is just a certain way so we can feel okay. We don't want to have too many. We do have a lot of rules. The monks have 227 rules. We have a lot of different protocols, but they're all very practical. And it's not about as being as tight or as strict as possible in and of itself. And so it's also, keeping that edge, just on the edge of our comfort zone and pushing the boundaries of our comfort zone. That's how we do with the lunar observance days, where we stay up later in meditation on those days, and just things like simplicity, like eating the main meal at 11 and not having dinner, for example. That's just simplicity. It's not like we're trying to torture ourselves. And when the schedule is very unstructured, then looking at what that's like. So actually seeing what is it like when I sleep as much as I want to and don't get up in the morning for chanting or whatever, and how does that affect the mind? So we start to see what's actually a good balance. So, all of us, many of us, not all of us, but many of us have probably tried going on retreat and then, okay, I'm just going to sleep as much as I want, and then I'll feel better than I do now. But actually, if you feel worse if you sleep too much. That's dukkha as well, so starting to see the dukkha of sleeping too much, and that there's actually less dukkha, less bodily and mental dukkha when you sleep just the right amount. Or even when you push your sleep schedule a little bit and go outside of your comfort zone, you see that mind gets bright. Mind actually gets brighter sometimes when one pushes through that kind of tiredness or what one thinks one needs. How many, we might even have sheets that say I need to sleep a certain number of hours each night, and if I don't tick off those hours, I don't use my sleep app on my phone or whatever, and then I won't be okay. I won't feel okay if I don't achieve that sleep app predetermined whatever. And so it's just to push the envelope a little bit, but it's not to be like unbelievably heroic or to make some sort of huge spiritual achievement, what we call spiritual athletics. And we're not like having an austerity competition or anything, but it's just seeing what works, what's the balance, like Luang Por said in his talk, like padi, what's just right. Dhamma is what's just right. So schedule is just helping us to discover that. During the Q&A, During the Q&A yesterday afternoon, I heard one of the recommendations to set a boundary. I feel like creating a boundary is falling into the category of the 5 hindrances, isn't it? Buddha taught us to practice the 4 Brahmaviharas, metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha, which are boundless. Please clarify why we need to set a boundary. Why don't we practice 4 Brahmaviharas instead? Sadhu. So yeah, those are sometimes maybe we're not at that level, maybe we're not advanced enough to be able to encompass somebody who's coming at us with anger or some sort of negativity, or we really do need to set a boundary to just fully encompass them with boundless loving kindness, compassion, equanimity, joy. It doesn't always work. We do need to set boundaries sometimes. And for myself, I've always been very bad at setting boundaries, and I have suffered from this in the past. But then, of course, as in a leadership position, having done this for a few years now, I've found that setting boundaries is almost like a self-preservation necessity, and it doesn't preclude having metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha. Sometimes setting a boundary is metta for the other person. They're going to harm themselves by what they're about to do to you or whatever. So actually setting a boundary, and actually it's like a little child who's running across the street and into the cars. You jump and yank them back even if it injures or harms them, or a child who's choking and you put your finger down their throat even if it's going to harm them, but you're going to save their life. Or somebody's doing something to you and you're going to save their life and your own life. They might be pulling you over a cliff with them. So it is okay to actually set boundaries. And I had an experience with this where I actually surprised myself by setting a very firm boundary with somebody last year, and it was actually I felt like it was the right thing to do, the right decision, and it was a protection for both people in the end. So setting boundaries, it doesn't, it is kind of like confounding oneself to try to like roll that into the 5 hindrances, or really it's just a way of being that's necessary sometimes. Okay, 2 more questions, and it's 4:30. No, 3 more questions. I'll leave those for to be answered tomorrow. So, okay. So, thank you everybody for your questions, and it's also good to answer questions. It can be a good test for myself. People are testing me today. And, so we'll just, how about we close with 4 Brahmaviharas, the page 41, the May I Abide in Well-Being. It's page 41 of Chanting Book 1. And after we do our closing chants, we'll have just a couple announcements. May I abide in well-being, in freedom from affliction, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may I maintain well-being in myself. May everyone abide in well-being, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may they maintain well-being in themselves. May all beings be released from all suffering, and may they not be parted from the good fortune they have attained. When they act upon intention, all beings are the owners of their action and inherit its results. Their future is born from such action, companion to such action, and its results will be their home. All actions with intention, be they skillful or harmful, of such acts, they will be the heirs. And page 33, the verses of sharing and aspiration. Now let us chant the verses of sharing and aspiration. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, may my spiritual teachers and guides of great virtue, my mother, my father, and my relatives, the sun and the moon, and all virtuous leaders of the world, may the highest gods and evil forces, celestial beings, guardian spirits of the earth, and the Lord of death, may those who are friendly, indifferent, or hostile, may all beings receive the blessings of my life. May they soon attain the threefold bliss and realize the deathless. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, and through this act of sharing, may all desires and attachments quickly cease, and all harmful states of mind, until I realize Nibbana in every kind of birth. May I have an upright mind, with mindfulness and wisdom, austerity and vigor. May the forces of delusion not take hold, nor weaken my resolve. The Buddha is my excellent refuge. Unsurpassed is the protection of the Dhamma. The solitary Buddha is my noble guide. The Sangha is my supreme support. Through the supreme power of all these, may darkness and illusion be dispelled. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava, the Lord, the perfectly enlightened and blessed one, Buddhang Bhagavan Bhagavantang Abhivademi. I render homage to the Buddha, the Blessed One. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo. The teaching so completely explained by him. Dhammang namasami. I bow to the Dhamma. Supatipanno Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho. The Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well. Sanghang namami. I bow to the Sangha. This is Nourishing the Roots, new book. I'm not sure if there's still some copies out there, but people are welcome to take, come for the day. And open evening. That just concludes our day. That's all I can think of.